If a girl was considered attractive, she could be sold from a very young age, as early as 3 or 4 years old, for purposes related to brothels. Later, she could grow into a sophisticated companion. Today, we will explore the floating world, a symbolic term for the fascinating universe of these women in Japan. We are currently in the midst of a journey through this country, and now we arrive at a truly intriguing subject: Geishas. To understand the role of Geishas, it's essential to grasp some fundamental aspects of the relationships between men and women, marriages, and how the Japanese viewed emotions in their traditional society. In ancient Japan, the roles of men and women were clearly defined, and marriages weren't necessarily acts of love, but rather familial commitments. Often, marriages were arranged by families for political or economic reasons, and intimate relationships were acquired only if the man wanted children. Generally, the woman would move into the husband's house, integrating into his family, and the father's authority over his daughter will be transferred to her husband. As for the husband's family, the head of the household was typically his mother, and the newly married wife had to respect a subordinate status. If the husband had sufficient financial resources, he could maintain courtesans, and sometimes even buy one to satisfy his physical desires. Children born from such relationships were often raised as legitimate members of the family, and the wife was responsible for managing the family's economic resources, ensuring that the husband's income was effectively used to maintain the house, weapons, and possibly even the army. In contrast, life for the lower social classes was much more difficult. Japan was a poor land, with a rugged landscape marked by frequent earthquakes and few natural resources. In this harsh context, the Japanese learned to utilize every available resource to survive. Girls, in particular, were seen as an important resource for their families. If a girl was considered attractive, she could be sold at a young age to a brothel and later become a sophisticated companion. This was one way families could ensure provisions, with the sale often made in exchange for goods like rice. In this way, the family could secure food for other members for a period, while the girl had a chance to escape poverty and live in a better environment. This reality provides a clearer picture of what lay beyond the makeup and appearances of the geishas. The concept of the geisha emerged in the 11th century with the development of the first forms of traditional craftsmanship and entertainment: dance, music, tea serving, and other forms of recreation. Geishas were not just women who fulfilled the physical desires of wealthy samurais, a role that was taken on by courtesans. Instead, they played a cultural role, creating a relaxed atmosphere and engaging in pleasant conversation. Initially, these entertainers were men, but women gradually took over, becoming the main representatives of the geisha tradition starting in the 18th century. The girl had to go through several stages. Once she caught the attention of the head of the house, she was treated as if adopted, with the owner selecting one of the most promising girls to mentor and eventually leave her legacy to. The young girl was sent to school, helped with age-appropriate household chores, and began private lessons in dance, music, poetry, calligraphy, proper clothing, and posture, skills that were necessary to master the profession. Her ties with her biological family were severed, and there was no life outside the geisha house for her. All costs associated with her education had to be repaid to the house through monthly installments once she started earning from her work as a geisha. As she entered adolescence, the girl was granted the title of apprentice geisha and placed under the mentorship of an experienced geisha who became like an older sister. She continued her training by assisting her mentor and participating in smaller events, though without a prominent role. Around the age of 14 to 16, an important event called Misi Anji took place, marking the girl's transition into adulthood. This rite of passage occurred after an auction, organized either by the house owner or the older sister, where 2 or 3 wealthy men would bid for the opportunity. The money raised went to the geisha house and was used to cover the expenses of the girl's upbringing. As she matured, the girl's prestige grew, and she became increasingly sought after at social events. This marked the beginning of what promised to be a successful career. Upon reaching adulthood, she would find a Dana, a man who provided for her without claiming any additional rights over her. The Geishas earned their living through engagements, performing at meetings and events, using their talents to entertain guests through music, dance, and poetry. Geishas wore distinctive hairstyles that varied according to their life stage. Apprentices wore their hair in a different style and donned hand-painted silk kimonos in vibrant colors, as well as high-soled sandals known as koboti. These sandals forced them to take small, graceful steps, giving them the appearance of delicate porcelain dolls. Their faces were powdered white, and their lips were outlined in red. As they reached maturity, they typically abandoned makeup and were more highly valued for their artistic expertise. The exact status of geishas has often been misunderstood. Some may view them as prostitutes, but this perspective doesn't align with the traditional view in Japanese society. In the 17th century, both male and female entertainers, including musicians and dancers, were invited to samurai homes to provide entertainment at gatherings, and their services were not sexually charged. However, by the 18th century, the role of the geisha began to take on a more sexual connotation. The first woman to officially adopt the title of geisha was a talented artist with a deep voice who went by the stage name Ikamaru. By the 19th century, legal reforms began to clearly separate the two worlds of courtesans and geishas. Geishas were prohibited from engaging in sex work, a practice reserved solely for courtesans, who were considered a higher social class. Geishas were not permitted to wear the same luxurious kimonos or jewelry, and were expected to remain understated, privileges that belonged only to courtesans. During the late 19th century and the Meiji Restoration, the status of geishas grew. They became renowned for their artistic skills and were seen as icons of style, emulated by the fashionable women of the time. The number of geishas flourished, and by the time World War II began, it was said that over 80,000 geishas existed in Japan. The war brought challenging times for geishas, as many were forced to work in factories to support Japan's war effort. The remaining geishas entertained American soldiers during the post-war period. In the aftermath, there was an attempt to modernize their image with contemporary fashions and new entertainment techniques, but this change was not well received by the public. As a result, geishas returned to their traditional practices, and their role as keepers of Japanese cultural heritage was reaffirmed. In 1956, the Prostitution Prevention Law was enacted, which legalized the profession of geishas, and by the 1960s, the recruitment of children for geisha training was prohibited. Consequently, the average age of geishas rose significantly, with only mature women being accepted into the profession. Today, the number of active geishas has greatly diminished, and those who remain are regarded as professional artists dedicated to preserving traditional Japanese arts. In conclusion, the life of geishas was shaped by a complex interplay of tradition, craftsmanship, and social status, and their role in Japanese culture evolved significantly over the centuries. These women were not just simple companions to influential men, but rather symbols of refinement, education, and art, preserving ancient traditions while intersecting with Japan's social and economic developments. From their modest beginnings, with young girls being sold to help their families survive, geishas became true artists and icons of Japanese culture. It's important to understand that geishas should not be reduced to mere entertainers for powerful men. They were an integral part of an ancient tradition that transformed into a respected profession with much deeper significance. Today, few geishas remain, but those who do are seen as true custodians of a unique culture and an ancient art that continues to captivate the world.